I would say that a major impetus for the founding of both the Community College Survey of Student Engagement and its 4-year sister survey, the National Survey of Student Engagement, was in higher education, the pervasive use of resources in defining what quality meant in higher education. That emphasis at the time, and I'm talking about the late 90s now, was exemplified by the annual best-selling college rankings issue put out by US News and World Report. And if you ask people how to determine whether a college was a good college or not, you would hear them talking about things like, how high is the tuition? If it's really expensive, it must be good. You'd hear them talking about what percentage of the faculty have PhDs, even if those PhDs never come within a half mile of an actual student. You would hear them talking about how much money is invested in research, for example, but you didn't hear them talking at that time much about whether students were succeeding, whether students were completing. You didn't hear them talking at all about equity in those outcomes for students.
And of course, we weren't interested in rating colleges. And community colleges are a lot different from universities, and our students are different. We were more interested in helping our students to be successful and helping them to learn.
The community college is a distinctive environment and with a distinctive student population, much more variety. I mean, much more, different kinds of practices and things like that.
The vision for CCCSE was essentially the vision for NSSE, and that is, can we develop a tool that would yield actionable data for the schools that were participating, and also serve to better inform the publics, the constituent groups of these places, about what really mattered to the quality of education at an individual institution and sector by sector and so forth and so on.
Here's what we were trying to do. We were trying to provide those tools. We were trying to promote transparency, accountability, and institutional improvement. And also, thirdly, to serve as a spotlight for the field, to sort of scan the horizon and identify those educational issues that community colleges have to contend with, the ones that are on them and the ones that are coming to them, so that we could illuminate the relevant student experiences. The transparency that I mentioned, the public reporting of results, and also important to note that I made the commitment that they were funding us for the 3 years of development and startup. And the commitment was that after those 3 years, the survey would be economically self-sufficient, that it would be able to go on without their support, which it has now for 20 years, thanks to you and to others.
There are very few, maybe you can count them on one hand, philanthropic funded operations that become self-supporting and then become part of the landscape of American higher education. We were talking with Pew about what became the National Survey of Student Engagement. It didn't have a name in 1998. And we did a quick series, two, what we call field tests. Peter Ewell may have talked with you about this because he was intimately involved in those. And near the end of the second, we were invited by Pew to write a proposal to run this survey. And in that proposal, Linda, we actually had the gall to say we wanted to do this with both 2-year and 4-year institutions. And we had fleshed this out in the proposal. And it didn't take too long before Russ Edgerton and Michelle Seidel, who was then also working, she was kind of kind of the second person in charge, so to speak, in the education program at Pew Charitable Trusts, it didn't take too long for them to say, why don't you take the 2-year sector out of this proposal? We think you're probably going to have your hands full just trying to figure out how to do what became the National Survey of Student Engagement, right? So I don't know whether we were mildly disappointed, but of course, our background, my background, the folks I was working with did not have nearly the tickets, so to speak, the gravitas, the recognition on the ground as the University of Texas at Austin, the Community College Leadership Program, and Kay in particular, although we didn't know what was going to happen with this 2-year project, or even if it was going to happen. I mean, the lights were blinking amber, an occasional green light near as we could tell. So you should know that. Folks ought to know that we wanted it all at Indiana University. But within a few months, there was talk, and I don't remember the exact details, but I do remember at least one and probably 2 meetings in Austin where I and some of the others we've already mentioned and a few others around the table began to flesh out what a 2-year student engagement survey might do and it might look like. And so I've mentioned those key people already.
A year or so after NSSE was launched, Russ Edgerton asked me where the community college survey should be located. And I had to think for about a nanosecond. I was then living and working in Denver at the Education Commission of the States. And it took me a nanosecond to say the Community College Leadership Program at the University of Texas at Austin. The reason being, of course, that UT Austin is a major research university. It has a value placed on research. It has a very strong community college leadership program led by Dr. John Rush. And because of John Rush, it had an enormous and powerful network of colleges and college presidents across the United States. And that could become the network through which a community college survey would get its legs. And so talked to John Rush, and from that moment forward, he became a patron, a supporter, an advocate for the Community College Survey of Student Engagement. I held a planning meeting, or actually a meeting to kick the tires on the idea, involving community college leaders, presidents from across the country, and Russ and Peter were there. And with a very enthusiastic endorsement from that group, the Pew Charitable Trust asked me for a proposal for the funding, but they also placed the condition that if they were to fund, that we would have to have a matching grant. And so not too long thereafter, Susan Connor from the Lumina Foundation for Education stepped right up to the plate, and NSSE became the very first grant ever made by the Lumina Foundation. So then we had our starting gate open for us. I can't say enough about John Rush. There was no singular moment because he was always there.
Getting it to CCLP to UT was not a foregone conclusion because, and Kay may have given some detail on this, but we do about the good work that George Koo and the team at Indiana were doing with the National Survey of Student Engagement. And we liked that idea very much. And it turned out then some other people began to think, well, we ought to do this for community colleges too, because my gosh, an open door college, I mean, what happens there really matters in terms of student success or graduation rates or whatever. So much of my focus with CCLP, with everything, has been around the notion that community colleges have to be more than just open door. And we were losing 90% of the students who needed developmental ed. And people say, well, what can you do? I mean, doors open, our offices are here, our people's here. Let's find out why students are here, what we can do to help them, what array of services they can provide. And so a lot of colleges had done a good job with it. Denver, I said I read a book about Denver, urban community college, very diverse student body, had more representation for women and minorities in the other colleges combined. And yet in 5 years, they were leading the state in graduation rates, transfer rates, you name it. So there's been a good bit of progress, and a lot of progress was being made, but CCCSE was another example, opportunity for us to take that and take the support of the colleges doing more and more of their own assessment and talking to more and more of their own students and so forth. So
I will say now that very great gratitude in the history of the Center for Community College Student Engagement is due to Russell Edgerton, who was the former retired president of the American Association for Higher Education and then a program officer at the Pew Charitable Trusts, to Peter Ewell at NCHEMS, who is no doubt one of the smartest people any of us has ever met and was the intellectual source of much of what we've done. And also to George Koo, who was the founder and director of NSSE, the National Survey of Student Engagement at the University of Indiana at Bloomington. All of those people were enormously generous in their vision, which I shared, that after NSSE was founded with funding from the Pew Charitable Trusts, everyone knew there was a need for a sister approach that was tailored for and appropriate to the community college sector in the United States.
We did look at NSSE's questions, and we had to decide whether they were appropriate or whether we needed to tweak them or develop new questions. We had to determine when during the term we should administer the survey to be most helpful for our students and our institutions, whether it should be a paper and pencil survey or whether it should be electronic, whether faculty would embrace this, whether faculty would allow us to take class time to administer a survey, whether it could be sustainable. Once the grant funds run out, will colleges be willing to pay for this service? And will it have an impact? Will it really make a difference for our colleges? So there were a lot of questions, but we did have some of the best thought leaders in higher education sitting around that table discussing all of these issues. And I'm very pleased that I was a part of that group of very influential, significant thinkers.
In some ways, like any other pilot project. That is, you question, will it work? Will it be accepted? Will it fly, in other words? So we knew that. But what was also different is that we had a feeling that this project, if it worked, was critically important to not only community colleges, but to the pathway for success of low-income and underserved students, since so many of them were going to community colleges. So we felt it was important to give those students a voice. I'm not saying it's so much conscious feeling, but I think underneath that we have a feeling this is really important work.
The challenge of retention in the community college environment is much greater than the four-year college environment. And so we wanted to have batteries of questions that focused on predicting student retention and graduation as well as learning. So it always had that dual purpose.
Anyone who has ever been engaged in survey research knows that it's no small thing simply to create a strong, valid research instrument. And our second commitment was that the items that we placed on the student engagement surveys would be based in evidence. And so I haven't looked for it for a long time, but there was at one time on the website, in the deep background of the website, a 300-page bibliography attached to each of the items on the survey as the demonstration of here's why we're asking this question, because there's evidence that says that it matters in students' educational experiences. And so survey item construction is a sticky wicket And we had to work very hard at doing that. Good news here also is that we had the support of George Koo and his staff at NSSE, and there were certain items that we wanted to have overlap with the 4-year version of the survey so that we could look at them and see how the sectors compared. But there were also items that really needed to be constructed specifically for the community college student and the student experience. And so we emerged from that process with a survey all of our own, and it's continued to get better and be refined along the way. So I would say that the survey construction was the toughest thing. And then we did pilot it with 12 colleges in the first year of CCCSE. And the presidents of those colleges were a part of, not all 12 of them, but about half of them were a part of the National Advisory Board. And we will be eternally grateful to them for their willingness to be the guinea pigs in that development process.
Every question on any of the survey instruments that we used was rigorously documented. We knew where it came from. We knew how it had been, the questions had been meticulously formulated. So you didn't have to argue about, well, that's not our data. Well, no, what do you mean by that? No, the students misunderstood it, and they're, and you just didn't have to do that. So I was very, very proud to be part of CCCSE in that sense. It changed a lot of institutions, changed the institutions I was at, and it certainly changed a lot of other institutions.